Japanese values of respect and politeness. Since ancient times, the persimmon has been one of Japan's favorite fruits. They ripen and are ready to pick in October. There are two types of persimmon, sweet and astringent. Sweet persimmons are delicious eaten raw. The astringent type must be peeled and dried to make them edible, since they're far too bitter to be enjoyed raw. In southern Nagano is a basin ringed by 3,000-meter mountains. Nourished by nutrient-rich melting, this fertile area produces a famous astringent persimmon, Ichida kaki. Over 500 years ago, farmers here discovered that the local persimmons became delicious when dried. Ichida kaki persimmons are famous for their exceptional sweetness. Drying gets rid of astringency, producing a dried fruit that's many times sweeter even than raw, sweet persimmon varieties. This isn't just a local specialty. Ichida kaki are famous throughout Japan. Oh, so delicious! Hirohiko Tanaka comes from a long line of persimmon growers.
一番大事なっていうのはやっぱり乾燥をしている期間での温度湿度の管理。急に乾かしちゃうとどうしても渋みの残ったような感じになっちゃいますし、硬くなったりしてしまいます。
Tanaka dries his persimmons for around 30 days. Slow, natural drying eliminates all astringency, giving a uniquely sweet, fleshy fruit that's both tender and chewy. But what really gives Ichida kaki their special taste and texture is the local natural environment. There's a very large temperature difference between night and day. This causes a dense mist to rise from the Tenmu River each morning. This river mist spreads throughout the area, bringing a gentle humidity that prevents the persimmons from drying too rapidly. Tanaka constantly checks his persimmons as they dry. Hour by hour, he monitors the changing weather and adjusts the drying conditions by blowing air on the fruits or by moving them about. As the moisture content falls, a white powder appears on the surface of the fruits. It's crystallized glucose, grape sugar. This is why they're so sweet, bringing the taste of this local specialty to a much wider market. The traditional skills of veteran producers like Tanaka have been adapted for this modern processing plant, capable of much larger scale production. A new generation of ambitious young producers is transforming the way Ichida kaki are made, further enhancing the flavor of these fruits.
安全でなおかつやっぱり喜んでもらえるようなそういうものをやっぱり作ってでやっぱり海外に出すと。
世界中の人たちに食べてもらって美味しいって思ってもらえたらそれは本当に嬉しいです。
Ichida kaki have a long history. Today's producers are building on that tradition, bringing the sweet taste of these dried persimmons to the wider world.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Japan Information and Culture Center, Embassy of Japan, for this evening's lecture, Maai, the Spaces Between Art and Design Practices. My name is Marina, and I am the JICC's Cultural Affairs Coordinator. Sorry, I just did the run back and forth a little bit. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you to our guest, Alfonso-san, as well as to the JICC team for making this evening possible. A quick reminder, please take a moment to silence your cell phones, and we kindly ask that you hold any questions until the end of the program. As always, we will conclude with a Q&A session. Also, not as always, we will be having a small giveaway after the Q&A session, so please stick around if you have time. Thank you all for attending this evening's lecture. I'd now like to introduce the Embassy of Japan's First Secretary, Tomoko Nakamura.
Hi, good evening and welcome. I'm Tomoko Nakamura from Embassy of Japan. And it's a pleasure to have you all here tonight for the lecture of Rina Alfonso, a founder and the creative director of Studio Aorta and kendo practitioner at Washington Dojo. At the JICC, we explore how Japanese culture inspires creative professionals across various fields. We are fortunate to have discovered Rina-san, a Philippine-born, Washington, D.C. based designer, artist, and educator. As the founder of Studio Aorta, she specializes in exhibition, publications, illustrations, and visual design that celebrate culture, history, social justice, and art. Rina-san is also a passionate kendo practitioner. She was the first woman in the Philippines to earn the black belt in kendo and now holds the rank of the fourth dan. Her connection to kendo influences her creative work, which is reflected in the lithograph print she created specifically for tonight's event. This one. This piece embodies the central themes of this evening: Japanese culture, art, design, and kendo. So we are honored to have Rina-san with us this evening to share how these influences have shaped her career and inspired her unique approach to design. She will explore how Japanese and Asian authentics, combined with over 20 years of kendo practice, have guided her creative philosophy. Through the concept of Maai, the space between, she will examine the interaction of Japanese authentics, kendo, and the Asian experience within the American design landscape. So this is my personal story, but before my current position at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., I had the privilege of working in the Philippines, where I collaborated with individuals in academia and arts and culture there. These experiences deepened my appreciation for the rich cultural connection between Japan and the Philippines. And on a personal note, as a mother of two children raised in both in the Philippines and the United States, and who also have strong ties with Japan, I'm especially excited to hear Rina-san's story, which beautifully waves together those cultural influences. So thank you for joining us tonight, and please join me in welcoming our guest, Rina Alfonso.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. It's a great honor and pleasure to be giving this talk. Before I begin, I'd like to extend a warm thank you to the JICC team for inviting me to give this talk. And with that, this was truly a collaborative effort between me and the JICC, and we went through rounds of editing of the content in order to come up with this lecture. With that said, I would like to welcome you to my lecture called Maai, the Space Between. This talk will be divided into 4 parts. The first part is a short personal story about my connection to Japanese culture and my path to the arts and culture world in DC. Part 2 will be a short overview of a few concepts in traditional Japanese aesthetics. Part 3 will be a background on kendo. And part 4 brings the concepts of aesthetics and kendo together and how they emerge in my own creative practice. I was born in Manila, Philippines, to parents who were educators. From a very young age, my curiosity was encouraged and nurtured by a love of books, art, culture, and adventure. I grew up in a lush, colorful environment. Our home was filled with art by national artists of the Philippines and interior design pieces my dad would bring home from his travels all over the world. It was in this environment, along with the warm and vibrant culture of the Philippines, where I first developed an affinity for art. Here you can see some snapshots of my childhood home, as well as a small portion of my family's personal library. Thanks to the global nature of my dad's work with the Asian Institute of Management in Manila, I was fortunate to be exposed to various cultures from a very young age. So my very first encounter with Japanese culture was probably thanks to my godmother, Inaba Etsu-san, a professor at the Asian Institute of Management, and who was a close friend and colleague of my parents. It is largely thanks to her that I always felt a closeness to Japan and its culture. In high school, I developed an interest in anime and manga, which in turn led me to an interest in kendo. I started training in kendo when I was 15 years old. Once I started, I was immediately hooked. Kendo inspired me to pursue a youth exchange program in Osaka, and there I achieved a significant milestone in my journey, the first black belt or shodan in kendo earned by a woman in the Philippines. Here you can see my class photo on the first day of school. I am, I think, like right there in the back. And this is a page from a memory book album my friends from the Kendo Club put together for me before I left, as this was before social media existed. And so I'm glad I have this album because I don't have any digital photos. And there I am again here on the right, visiting the school after almost 20 years for the first time after 20 years. I've been practicing kendo for almost 24 years now, and I can truly say that it has had a remarkable impact on my life. I've formed meaningful relationships that have sustained me through the toughest times of my life. Most notably, I met my husband, Osamu, through kendo, so my life truly wouldn't be what it is without it. Here I am in a few photos of some of the kendo communities I'm a part of. These are some of the leading senseis of kendo in the Philippines. These two senseis led the first delegation of the Philippines to the World Kendo Championships in last year. Ozawa Sensei in the middle wrote a very definitive book on kendo, one of the first books in English about kendo. And this is my current dojo, Washington, and I help instruct and also practice a few times a week. After Osaka and spending college at Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, spending a year in Ateneo, I decided to return to Japan and transferred into Sophia University in Tokyo, where I pursued a degree in comparative culture with a concentration in art history. I wanted to get formal high-level language training and continue to pursue studies in the humanities, which I started at Ateneo. And for those of you who might know, when I was in Osaka, I did not really have formal Japanese training, so I picked up Osaka Ben. And when I got to Tokyo, everybody was like, "Why do you speak Osaka Ben?" But thankfully, Sophia kind of cured it a little bit. But when I go back to Osaka, I almost immediately speak Osaka Ben again. I also wanted to continue kendo training in Japan and was able to do so at Kobukan Dojo in Nakanoku. And little did I know that this would simply be the start of my journey. After graduating college, my parents encouraged me to pursue graduate studies. I ended up at the Corcoran College of Art and Design, which is now part of the George Washington University. Since childhood, I've always been a creative person, but my intellectual curiosity was fed by my studies in art history, so I became interested in museums and cultural work. But the creative bug never left me. When I found the MA Exhibition Design program at the Corcoran, I felt like I could get the best of both worlds, participating in both the creation and development of exhibitions. Through my exhibition design studies, I started to truly think about what it means to be multidisciplinary, multicultural, and ultimately intersectional. The images you see here are from my graduate thesis project, which was, of course, about kendo. So that's a little about my background and how I got here. I'd like to now move on to talking about aesthetics. Before I continue, I also want to note that I am by no means a scholar on art history or Japanese aesthetics. So this is not a comprehensive survey of that, but it's meant to give context to this talk. Aesthetic and artistic dialogues have always existed throughout time, specifically throughout art history. Possibly the most well-known instance of this dialogue is between Japanese and European art. Japonism heavily influenced the Impressionists, who in turn redefined the trajectory of modern art by the rejection of the academic standards in favor of capturing fleeting moments in time. Here you can see one of Katsushika Hokusai's 36 views of Mount Fuji, next to Claude Monet's Japanese bridge at Giverny, both iconic images in their own right. Not only is the subject the same, but if you look at how each artist captures color in each scene, you will notice that the palette is specific to the season and time of day. When you take a look at the history of art, however, much of the focus is placed on the fine arts in comparison to other disciplines such as graphic design. Again, I'm not an expert in design history, but this might be because also that the field of graphic design itself was not entirely defined until the early 20th century when W.A. Dwiggins started to use the term graphic design to unite various forms of commercial and applied art under one umbrella term. If you are interested in Dwiggins and learning more about that, I highly recommend the Letterform Archives book about his life and work, which I've added to the list of references at the end. Almost simultaneously, in Japan, a similar development was happening around the turn of the 20th century, where Japanese artists started to use their work for commercial purposes. Design in Japan began to emerge as a formal discipline, advocating for its social legitimacy within artistic practice and as a profession. The Japanese term for graphic design, shōgyo bijutsu, was translated from the English commercial art around 1926, not too long after Dwiggins started to use the term graphic design in 1922. Here you can see some examples of early Japanese graphic design, also from another Letterform archive book, and listed as a reference. I would like to offer here that despite the uniqueness of Japanese aesthetics, their impact on design has always been a result of aesthetic dialogue, whether directly or indirectly. Contemporary design sits at the nexus of this dialogue. So if I'd like just to go back here for a second, and you can see in some of Dwiggins' work, some of the emblems and patterning that he uses and that simplification can actually be related to this type of graphic design which was happening in Japan. So there's an interesting comparison that can be made between those two. But what are Japanese aesthetics and how do they relate to kendo in my design practice? There are plenty of other concepts that would take a whole other series of lectures to cover, but I'd like to talk about just a few that tie together kendo and design. The first concept is mono no aware, which refers to the beauty and fleeting moments such as sakura flowers falling after they have bloomed. I'm sure as DC residents, we're all very well versed in this one, and you can see some of that in the wonderful photo exhibition in the gallery where you just came through to get here. The second is wabi-sabi, a beauty that is austere, organic, and imperfect. It is usually depicted by the artistry of kintsugi, in which broken pottery is repaired and filled with gold. The third is ma, literally translated as space, which is beauty that is formless and at the same time exists to fill a sense of emptiness. Ma manifests itself in the arts in different ways based on the discipline. One of my favorite contemporary examples of this is in films, where there are generous transition scenes that feel like fillers, but actually they're very important in how the storyline moves forward. So now this brings us to the connective thread between aesthetics and my design practice, kendo. May I know who in the audience is familiar with kendo or who has had experience in it? Can I just get a quick show of hands? Not too many, one or two? Okay, well, at least there's not zero. So the All Japan Kendo Federation, which oversees the regulation of kendo in Japan, defines kendo in two parts. First, as a sport where competitors wear armor and strike each other with a bamboo sword. And second, a martial way, or budo, that aims to forge the mind and body of each practitioner through continuous practice. Here you can see an example of what kendo bogu or armor looks like, and the shinai or bamboo swords that we use in our typical practice. Kendo practice is based on the historical swordsmanship practices of the samurai, where techniques are intertwined with the evolution of the Japanese sword, which in itself is a work of art. To me, however, kendo stands out as a martial art in that it is nearly impossible to grasp its essence without practicing with a partner. So while many may perceive kendo primarily as a sport and a martial art, I also sincerely believe that when you practice kendo, you realize how you are part of a community, which then transforms it into a way of life. And because of its deep integration into my life through years of continuous practice, I slowly started to understand where the intersection of aesthetics and kendo philosophy started to emerge in my own understanding of design and its relationship to my own creative practice. Which now brings me to Maai, which is the concept of ma, or space, as I have previously discussed, and how it shows up specifically in the practice of kendo. If you translate Maai directly into English, it is a combination word in two parts. The first means space, which is the ma from the study of aesthetics, and the second part means to combine or to come together. In kendo, we use it to talk about the distance between two opponents, specifically before a technique or waza is performed. When we teach kendo in English, we use the word distance, but its essence comes from the aesthetic concept of ma. It manifests itself between the tips of the swords, right in that small space that you see inside the yellow circle. So we have different forms of Maai in kendo. So when we say toma, which is the far distance or like the farther Maai, it's actually even more like spread out than this. Then there's one called isoku itto no ma, which means a one-step distance and further on. So there are specific terms that then relate to ma based on how it appears within a match. I prefer to think of Maai as space rather than distance, where two individuals meet and form an experience. This specific interpretation of Maai and its relevance in kendo, in the form of Maai, as a lifelong practice, has always fascinated me. Maai is a key point that defines the overall tone, quality, and effectiveness of each technique practiced in kendo. The official dictionary of kendo states that the establishment of Maai through the relationship with the opponent is a subtle and important matter. Emphasis here on the relationship between the opponents. As I continue to practice kendo, I've thought about how this concept of the in-between, encounters, and other types of Japanese aesthetics are also applicable to my creative practice. One way through which this manifests is through the concept of Maai. For me, art and design exist in the space between audience and content. A quick note here, when I refer to content, I mean the messages and narratives being expressed through creative means, and not necessarily in a content creation sense as we are so accustomed to seeing today in our digital lives. So to tie this all together, I'd like to revisit a few aesthetic concepts as they relate to my creative work. First is the concept of mono no aware, which focuses on the fleeting nature of beauty that is temporary. This can relate to how process is a key experience in creative work. It captures ideas generated by the convergence of narratives, space, and people. Here, for example, you can see an image of a brainstorming workshop I conducted for a project, and quick, rapid sketches to generate ideas at a very early stage of a project. While a lot of design thinking practices primarily value these as points for data generation, I like to think that these moments in themselves can be considered an aesthetic experience that contributes to the overall intent of the project. The spirit of mono no aware can also bring us to approach each new encounter with curiosity and openness, which also relates to another kendo concept, shoshin, or the beginner's mind. When we give importance to the process and intention of creative work, it also allows us to embrace the beauty of imperfection and organic forms. This is embodied in the spirit of wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi allows us to consider that even imperfect work can create a meaningful encounter. If we consider this in formal compositions, asymmetry can counterbalance emptiness by allowing the viewer or visitor to refocus and imprint meaning into the space that they are invited to occupy. Intentional, organic interruptions, or conversely, formless space or ma, in a composition can create meaning simply through their presence. In this graphic layout, for example, I use white space, or like the ma in the composition, to bring emphasis to the main text and have intentionally made the gradient circles imperfect as they are supposed to represent sound. Ma itself is a key component in how creative work evolves, as creative work evolves with time, and space between bouts of artistic production allow refinement through iteration. So in this case, when we relate it to wabi-sabi, we can relate it to wabi-sabi in that ideas in themselves might be imperfect, but seeking the optimal space between these ideas then leads to the development of new perspectives and opens up opportunities for experimentation. And this is certainly true not just in design but in kendo also, where slight variances in Maai, as I talked about, produce remarkably varied results in the execution of a technique. It is this conscious convergence of spaces that is between content, audience, art, and space, which drives my creative process and why I've continued to find meaning in my work. In all forms of communication-driven art and design, how the audience receives and processes your work creates a space between the creative intent and the message, and it is in this space where meaningful connections are formed. So in an exhibition, for example, this could take the form of the exhibition space or site. It becomes crucial for the flow of an exhibition and spatial layout to consider how it supports and enhances the narrative. So back here, you can see this is a floor plan of one of the projects that I've worked on, and we do this before every this type of mapping before we go into any form of design. Here you can see like some images of a project that I worked on and completed in 2022. This project was a temporary installation in a convention hall. So the enclosure for the exhibition had to be constructed from scratch. The open yet enclosed layout allowed the narrative to exist within its own environment while also being part of a larger event, which was a big convention. This other project, on the other hand, is in a historic house, which also functions as a multi-purpose community space. So how the space would be used was a big consideration in how we mapped the exhibition into the house. So we stuck mainly to the walls for this one so that public programming and tours could be given and adapted depending on who was hosting it or the needs of each program. In two-dimensional graphic design, This convergence takes place when images and text come together in a visual composition, such as layout with typography, images, and illustration. The placement of images and text in a graphic layout and their interaction with white space create visual cues that enhance the message being communicated. So, as you show, I'm showing a few examples of my work. This print was a piece for the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition Service in order to communicate the multicultural story of the Japanese war brides. I used a combination of traditional Japanese graphic patterns, a color palette with cultural meaning in both cultures, so the red, white, and blue obviously as it relates to American history, but the blue, I specifically toned it to match indigo dye, which is used for dyeing kimono, hakama, and other types of Japanese fabric. And then I also used an asymmetrical grid on most of the spreads, similar to how you would see, posters and in Japanese design rather than more of a Western grid. So another example of some of the graphic design work I've done in relation to this concept. These were two options for the same project. The one on the top right was one that was selected and installed, but I actually prefer this one down here in the bottom. This option combined a few deliberate choices that had a subtle yet strong implications to the design because of where the banners are installed. So the first design represents the rotunda of the National Archives. The intent was to bring people in, or to let people know that behind this facade was that big rotunda, and to also communicate that the National Archives has a museum. Everybody thinks that the National Archives, where you do research, is the same as the museum, and those are two separate things. The one on the bottom, the typeface was designed by a local type designer based on civil rights era posters, and the color palette aims to represent sunlight but breaks apart into a spectrum as represented by the prismatic gradient. So typography and the design of type itself also adds another layer of complexity and a nuance to graphic composition, so that the moment when the viewer or reader recognizes letter form shapes may also create an aesthetic experience. Aside from my work in exhibit and graphic design, I have recently also started to create art and self-directed work, making art prints on a risograph duplicator printer. Risograph duplicators originated in Japan and were typically used for non-commercial, high-volume printing, such as schools and churches. They started to not be used or started when more efficient laser printers and inkjet became more popular. Risograph printers started to be sold secondhand because the technology seemed defunct. But they have recently had a resurgence in popularity with artists, using them to pursue independent publishing and also self-directed creative work. This form of making combines my design work with artistic expression, existing in an in-between space. I can use both analog and digital skills to create distinct images through layers of color, images, and paper, with plenty of imperfections in both the process and the product. Through this talk, you've heard me talk about my creative practice as both art and design, rather than one or the other. For the most part, art and design are usually treated as separate disciplines within the creative world, divided by function rather than aesthetic value. I personally struggled with how to define my approach to creativity because of the prevalent binary that categorizes each as its own separate field. But thanks to revisiting my work and creative journey through the lens of Japanese aesthetics as well as kendo, I can say with a fair amount of certainty that my work is both. Similar to and in parallel with my practice of kendo, my creative work continues to evolve because it toggles both art and design, performing a function through communicating narratives while also capturing my personal perspective. It connects me to a larger context while being unique to me. So how is this relevant today, you might ask? The ideas I've presented here argue for the value of a multicultural perspective in a creative profession. As we've seen, dialogues between cultures in the arts and design have always been present and have continued throughout time. So there is no doubt that dialogue between cultures can create meaningful connections and even create new movements for creative expression. The experience of and study of Japanese culture and aesthetics through various modes of art, history, and kendo, whilst coming from a unique and rich culture myself, furthermore practicing and functioning and also practicing professionally in a third country, have allowed me to approach projects with depth, curiosity, focus, and experimentation. I believe that this is especially important and crucial in a context where one-sided divisive ideologies are becoming increasingly prevalent. This is contrary to the beauty and nature of nature and human expression that is represented in so many of traditional Japanese aesthetics. I'd like to conclude then by offering one last concept present in many traditional Japanese arts, such as sado and yes, kendo too. It is ichigo ichie, which means one chance, one meeting. It emphasizes the importance of every moment as something cannot be repeated once it has passed. I believe that each encounter with art and design has the ability to create a meaningful experience. It is sincerely my hope that this talk, in its own way, has also done the same for you all tonight. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share my thoughts, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. So, Ms. Sundar,
So before we open the floor for a question and answer session, may we have one more warm round of applause for our wonderful speaker. And so does anyone have any questions? I have our lovely intern, May, in the back with a microphone. So if you do, please raise your hand.
Well, first of all, thank you, Rina. It was awesome. We know each other well and know kind of, we've journeyed together from exhibition design school. And so I think it's really interesting that you have the exposure to three-dimensional space through exhibit design. And so can you talk about that? Because I think it's important when you work in the 2D space, that how much that has informed your design. And if you would encourage, academic programs to encourage designers to learn both, because it helps actually in both directions, both 2D and 3D.
So it's a question that, would you encourage both? Yes. Okay. Yes, I absolutely would. I do think that there also needs to be a distinction though in, like exhibition design itself is a new, not new, but like young field compared to architecture, graphic design as we've seen, because if that started in the 20s, architecture has been around forever. But like how do we define design and like how do we find spatial design, I think is still in development. I like to think also like two-dimensional space is a space, three-dimensional space is a space. So how those two things connect, I think is where design education can, I guess, can improve that connection. I feel when I learn about two-dimensional graphic design that a lot of it tends to be digital these days, that some of the students that I've spoken to about, career paths in design are like, well, I am going to be a web designer. And I'm like, there's so many things you can do with graphic design degree and not just be in the digital space. So I think that learning about what constitutes space in both 2D and 3D context is really crucial in design education. So yes, I absolutely would encourage that.
can you tell us a little bit more about kendo? I've seen films and that sort of thing, but I don't know if it's a sport or if it's ritualistic or exactly what it's intended to convey.
Sure. So as I excuse me, as I mentioned, kendo is defined in two parts. So there's a sport component and a martial art component. So as a sport, it is like other martial arts that are considered sports like judo, karate. Not aikido isn't like as much as a sport, but like judo and karate are probably the closest to that. It is not included in the Olympics, so I think that's why people don't really consider it as a sport. But there's a specific reason for that, and that's a whole other debate that I won't get into because some of my senseis might not like some of my thoughts or answers. But I do think that, but kendo in itself evolved from the samurai arts. So the fighting techniques of the samurai from in historical Kamakura period, Muromachi, warring state, Sengoku, all of those techniques were then formalized into a one set of forms and techniques when the Edo period, during the Edo period and the Meiji Restoration, because you couldn't fight, you couldn't carry swords, you couldn't fight anybody, but they wanted to preserve those techniques as a cultural, because it had cultural value. So they created kendo based of, or a set of forms, the Nihon Kendo Kata, which all of us who practice kendo know. They created those forms in the early 20th century. I believe it was around 1912. That was the first instance in when the term kendo was used. Kendo is way of the sword, like literally the way of the sword. And they unified all of the techniques of all of the samurai from all over Japan so that it would have like this universal cultural meaning within Japanese culture. So it's a martial art, but it's very physical. Like I said, like people have their own ways of defining it. I think when you're a teenager practicing in like really high level competition, you consider it like as a sport. But as somebody like me who started, in a very different stage of my life and practices it for a very different reason right now, that's why I consider it more of a way of life. And it is exercise. It's also like mental training. There's a mindfulness component to it. It's really, once you really understand and grasp like why you practice it for yourself, it can really create opportunities for like changing the way you think. So yeah, I hope, does that answer your question?
Thank you again for this, and I really love your slides and the lines, the colors and the lines throughout. It was really beautifully done. I respect that. Thank you. I have a question. I know that both the Philippines and Japan have strong textile traditions, and you mentioned these aesthetic concepts, and I just couldn't help but, being a quilter myself, map each one of them onto, oh yeah, that works for quilting, that works for it makes me wonder, I guess it's a simple question. Each of these aesthetic concepts you've introduced, do they go across many different types of Japanese art? Would it apply to theater and textiles and everything? These are commonly known concepts in Japan, in different artistic communities?
Yes, yes. The simple answer is yes. So I think one of the most significant or like early representations, or like one of the earliest works of art in Japanese culture that really sort of solidified each of these concepts was the Tale of Genji, the first novel ever to be written, and was written by a woman, no less. So like a lot of scholars have studied each of these aesthetics with that one work alone, but it's also applicable like throughout all like many different eras of Japanese art. So like one of my favorite ways to simply, or like a contemporary way of explaining ma, for example, is like in Studio Ghibli films. If anybody here loves Studio Ghibli, like there are these beautiful, like, it's like a butterfly flying off into the distance, but you know, it's like, are they flying off into the distance to like that scene where the next scene, you know, or like somebody's just like stirring a pot of rice, you know, like that sort of like really awareness of the moment is really present in a lot of Japanese art forms.
Hello, thank you so much for this. We're actually counseling students at George Washington University, and you're speaking about mindfulness and space, and I was, you know, kintsugi gets used a lot as a metaphor in mental health and perspective shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could speak about your headspace as far as your perspective when it's different and when it's related, when you're engaging with kendo, with art. You know, there's that idea that our perspective shapes our reality. So I was curious to see if what you found as in your journey with what's similar, what's different, what's striking.
Sure. Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
I'm so sorry.
No
My
worries.
question is about like what's the headspace that you take in kendo versus when you're an artist or in other parts of your life, and what has come up for you in this process with doing this work?
Sure. So I can tell you that when I started kendo, I was in a very different headspace because I was a teenager who was angsty and, you know, just kind of wanted to do my own thing. And I thought it was cool, you know, and that was a completely different mind space. But when I started to practice, there's another, I'm sorry to like load you all with Japanese words and concepts, but I feel like it's a disservice not to mention the Japanese word for it. But there's a term in kendo that's called mushin, which means the empty mind, or like the formless mind. And there are specific practices in kendo where you push yourself to a physical limit so that your mind empties, and that's related a lot to Buddhism. That is, you know, like mindfulness, as you very well know. I've found most of the time when I'm stuck on something, or when I'm like, whether it's kendo, whether it's art, if I take a pause and I'm like, all right, what do I need to do? What is the something that will nourish me in this moment in order for me to like get into that other headspace? I make that shift. And having like kendo, for example, knowing that I've pushed myself to a very like tough limit, like that, like again, it's like this moment, like knowing that that has happened to me helps me then when I'm stuck on an art project or an exhibition project. I'm like, I've done this hard thing, so I can get through this, but maybe I just need to take a beat. Like every interaction in kendo, you come back and like sort of reset. So knowing that you can reset, is it a moment that you need to reset? Relating all of those things in art and design has really helped me define sort of how I work. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but in kendo, I'm very focused on kendo because I have this, notion of like, am I here for this, like, to empty my mind? Am I here to, to have to like calm like other thoughts? And in the art process as well, sometimes I'm like, am I pushing myself to come up with as many ideas as I possibly can? Or am I here to refine something that I'm already developed and just need a lot of practice and refinement on? So I think just having those like pockets and then like saying like, oh my God, it's the same, but the practice is different, has helped me maintain that awareness. But I think for me, because I've practiced kendo for so long and like I've been creative my whole life, that those things just like bled together. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Hi, Thank you so much for this. This has been super awesome to hear. I'm a museum educator, and so that's what my background is. And I've always been really interested in design's ability to educate others. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about exhibitions design's ability to teach or like create a space for teaching and educating others. Like what makes it special in that way?
How much time do I have? I think exhibitions are awesome. So, fun fact, I take my daughter 2 days a week to this, a program run by the Smithsonian. She's 2 years old. She was the crying baby that just left the room. But an amazing is we visit a museum every single time. So there's, a concept we're learning about birds or water or clouds and, or shapes. And it's been amazing to see, like, she has very limited, like, verbal skills, but I can see, like, when her mind clicks and, like, makes connections between concepts. So I think museums are very, very powerful in that. They have this ability to educate without words, almost. Like, she now always says, like, I want to go say hi to the elephant, or I want to visit the yellow pumpkin. And she noticed in the yellow pumpkin by the Kusama Yayoi sculpture in the Hirschhorn. So I was like, what do you see in the pumpkin? And at first she would say polka dots. But it was a really sunny day. You could see her reflection. And she was like, I see mama. And I was like, so she understands that there's a reflection. And I didn't teach her that. So I think that's power, like just the presence of art. But again, this is where art and design converge, because you have the artwork, but the design of the space and the intentional placement and communication of the narrative of the exhibition helps create that meaning that my daughter picked up on, so.
So I think we'll do two more. So 1, 2. Sorry if I'm missing line of sight over here.
Hi, thank you so much for coming here and joining us. Your talk reminded me a lot of an essay called In Praise of Shadows. And in that essay, the author describes how darkness can have its own aesthetic. It's not just the absence of light. Are there similar works in the field that it would be interesting to explore if you wanted to explore alternate ways of looking at the world around you?
So are there alternative, like, artworks or techniques, or?
Not artworks, but ways of looking at things. I guess my question's not very clear.
No, I think it makes sense. So, like, using a framework of darkness, for example, and like absolutely. I think that there's so much interpretation happening in the world around us. Like, this was just one way of, like, I could take any more of those, like, other Japanese aesthetics that I did not talk about, and use it to, like, think about creativity too, and, like, how that relates. Like, I think it's almost, like, limitless, and it's a matter of, like, having the time, really, and, like, again, space to, like, think about where all of these concepts meet, and making those connections is where we find meaning, right? So I would love to explore. I don't know what those are at the moment, but I definitely will keep thinking about it.
And then last one, right behind her, right here. Yep, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation this evening. And I'm sort of a newcomer to Japanese art and aesthetics and design, and so I'm really, like, would love at the end. I would love to hear any recommendations that you have to continue, like, growing familiarity with these concepts. And I guess my question for you is, when I think of Japanese design, the first thing that comes to mind is, like, functional design. So furniture, the, like, super clean aesthetic of, a room that's been designed in a certain way to feel very, like, just calm and clean. And I guess I wonder if you can how would you apply the lens of the couple of aesthetic tools that you talked about tonight to just why I guess why do I feel so calmed and relaxed and just good when I am around in the presence of some of this very clean modern Japanese aesthetic design, functional design, furniture, dishes. I don't know, I love the straight edge plates and cups and things that stack perfectly. And I don't know, I'm not explaining this very well, but how would you apply the concepts from visual art and design to more functional pieces?
So if you want to dive into aesthetics, I would definitely get into more the more academic stuff, thinking about if you read about Mono no Aware and Wabi Sabi and all of that feeds all into this clean design. But I want to make maybe an unpopular opinion that Japanese design is not all clean and beautiful like that. There's also there's a very tactile, organic nature, and there's a messiness to some things that I think are what characterize that essence of it. It's more organic, and I think that's where your calmness is coming from, is because of this closeness to nature, and that is a very, very deep philosophical, spiritual connection. But if you wanted to get into understanding aesthetics, I would start with those more philosophical concepts, and then diving into more of the art history, really, see how that style emerged, perhaps. And to contrast that, I would say if you know the artist Murakami with super flat, I mean, that's not clean and beautiful and mindful. It's chaotic and messy and really crazy. The big, I'm talking about his large scale works, not the Louis Vuitton bags. But that sort of, I think it's that there's always a dialogue, like I said. And if you understand the dialogue, then you start to understand the concepts that keep repeating itself. And those concepts just take form, take shape in different ways. So that's why you can find it in so many different forms, not just spatial design, not just graphic design, not just textiles or kendo, or it's throughout this, because they have this relationship to a philosophical mindset, really.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you again for attending tonight's talk. So we are doing a very small giveaway, but I know some people may want to move on with the rest of their night. So please feel free to do so. But when you do, if you have the chance, if you enjoyed this event, there will be a survey sent out later this evening, as well as paper surveys in the gallery. Winner, if you have a moment, please complete the survey. It helps ensure that we're able to bring more events like this to you. But I think if you can just take a moment so we can reset. If you're interested for the giveaway, please stick around. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If anyone has further questions, I'll be sticking around too, so feel free to just ask me.
Okay, so who here knows jankenpon? Jankenpon. So it's basically Japanese rock, paper, scissors. I feel it's easier to do the Japanese style of rock, paper, scissors than the American, because there's so many different variations of American. So I just like to do jankenpon, which is the Japanese version. Sorry, this iPad is going really slow. I'm trying to get it to turn off the screen. So first, Rina-san, would you like to let people know what the giveaway items would be?
Oh, sure. I have a few of the prints since these were made. So there are 5 of them. So if you would like a print, please participate. We were trying to figure out how to.
We've been fighting over them in the office.
Yeah.
So for jankenpon, it's very simple of just rock, paper, scissors. but the rhythm is slightly different. So it's just rock, paper, scissors, and then you go. And we'll just, I think, continue with that at first. Maybe first it will just, yeah, we'll just do rock. We'll just do junk and pull to start. I'm getting back to my English teacher ways. Okay, so who would like to participate? If you could please raise your hand.
Oh my gosh.
Lovely. And if you could please
That's
stand up.
awesome.
So you basically will be competing against me. So if you win against me, then you can stay standing. If you lose, or how about you say lose or tie, then we'll please sit down, and we'll just do elimination. So if you're interested in the print, please stand up. Thank you. Lovely. So first we'll just do a practice round to be fair, I suppose. So it'll just be jang, kin, pon. So I did scissors, so if you did rock, then you can stay standing. If you did scissors or paper, then you would sit down. But that was a practice round. So is everyone good? All right, lovely. All right, so ready? Jang, kin, pon. All right, so if you are tying or you win against me, so only if you have scissors. If you have scissors, please sit down. If you have scissors, please stay standing. Everyone else, please sit down. If you're paper, if you're tied, then also sit down.
Oh no.
It is numbered. So let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, perfect.
Wow.
How about? Should we have them go against each other or against me again?
I think maybe if they go against you one more time.
You have against me one? Okay, thank you. So ready? Jang, kim, pon. We have paper. So if you have paper, you have paper. So you have paper. You have paper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that perfect 5?
Is that a perfect 5? Yes.
Oh wait, or that's 4. Wait, 4. Okay, so
4.
the current 4, please come up. If you were standing before, please stand back up again so we can go. Thank you. All right. Or if you were tied. If you were tied this last time. All right. So ready?
The tie the last time.
The tie of last time.
So if you won, the people who won just now, can you please sit down? And then the people who were tied the last round.
Oh, the people who just won can come up to the stage, maybe. Yeah, sorry. to eliminate. Sorry, I cannot see.
If you won, the 4 people that won in the last round, you can come up, and I'll just.
Thank you. All right. So, the final 4? Final 4. All right. Ready? So, jang, kim, pon. So we have paper. Okay, how about you two, please, against each other? Last time. Ready? I think it's the final 2. Ready? Ready? Jang, kim, pon. So we have our final winner. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And if you can, please fill out a survey. I believe there's also tea in the gallery, so please enjoy the exhibition before you leave. Thank you.
No worries. Hello. Yes.
I appreciated you attributing your parents' home to your formation.
Of course.
I think this is something that's terribly underappreciated.
Oh.
My whole artistic ethic and my interest in Japanese porcelain began in my home.
Yes.
And my mother was a terrible smoker, so she hated ashtrays. So she used Japanese porcelains for her ashtrays.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
And that was my introduction.
Amazing. Yeah.
Totally unintentional.
Right.
But so many of these things are unintentional.
Exactly. Like my godmother, like if there wasn't that connection, I don't know if I would ever be this
She
close
was
to
the
this.
woman in the photograph.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hello. I think on my bio on the website, they linked my but there's a, I think I have it here. You might actually